When I was born, my father was a policeman, and he had served 11 years in the police, but had a real sense of being called to the ministry. And literally just after I was born, he headed across from Belfast, where he had been living. He went over by himself to study for the ministry in London, and spent 3 years in Oak Hill College in London, and he trained for the ministry there. And that meant by the age of 4, he was being called into his first ministerial charge, which happens to be in England. And from that point onwards, I was growing up as the son of a pastor. And he happened to be a real lover of Banner books, and he bought many of them. I think he kept the Banner in business for a number of years. Just every book that came out, he bought every Banner book. But it also had a huge impact upon his ministry. He spent 3 years sitting under the ministry of Martin Lloyd-Jones for the part of the Romans series on Friday evenings, and going to hear Ian Murray preach in Grove Chapel in Camberwell every Sunday evening when he was preaching through the Ten Commandments and other series that he did. So just being exposed to the ministry of Lloyd-Jones and Ian Murray had a huge impact upon him and the kind of preacher he became. And so I grew up, we moved then to the west of Ireland, to this tiny village of about 150 people. He went to a church that was small, where there hadn't been much of a gospel influence over the years. They hadn't had sermons longer than 5 minutes in living memory. And he immediately started preaching for 40, 45 minutes plus. So that was a shock to their system. And it was in the early years of my growing up under that kind of preaching, at around the age of 10 or so, I first began to consciously realize that this was not just a message to know, it was a message to respond to. And with the simplicity of a 10-year-old's faith, I trusted my life to the Lord Jesus Christ. And within 6 months of that was being sent off to boarding school as a 10-year-old, which was going to be an interesting experience as someone who had just professed faith. But in many ways, learned so much about what it meant to be a Christian, by being a Christian in a very hostile environment. My first 2 years in boarding school, I was the only Christian in my year. But during that second year, 3 of my best friends became Christians, and we started meeting together for Bible study on a regular basis. Amazingly, God blessed those Bible studies and our times of prayer. And in the space of the next 3 years, a group of 4 of us, it became a group of 50, with a lot of our classmates becoming Christians. And I think I was 14 when I gave my first talk. Was asked to speak from the closing verses of Acts 17 on the way that the crowds in Athens responded to Paul's ministry to the Areopagus, and pressed it home to the little group there that night. Well, how are you going to respond? Is it going to be through indifference, or is it going to be through faith? And it was exciting to see a handful of the guys there that night say, well, we want to become Christians, tell us how. And it was the year after that, when I was 15, walking along a beach on the north coast of Ireland one winter's afternoon with my father and a few other people. And it was that time of life when you're under pressure to think about your career. And different people were saying, oh, you should think about this, you should think about that. And the only thing that kept coming back to me was, I want to be a pastor, I want to be a preacher. And that really became the bearing that I was steering to from that point onwards. Wasn't sure whether I should do the same thing as my father and spend a number of years in secular work. He said he learned more as a policeman in 11 years than he did in 3 years of practical theology classes. But in the end, long story short, when I completed my university career in Belfast, went to Westminster Seminary in Philadelphia, 1981. Spent 3 delightful years there. They weren't free from difficulty. There were all kinds of challenges, but was helped significantly by getting a letter from Sinclair Ferguson in the first 3 weeks I was in Westminster, where he simply said, if you invest these 3 years wisely, they'll repay dividends for the rest of your life. And with that in mind, I tried to make the most of the 3 years I had there. And after that was asked by the Evangelical Presbyterian Church in Ireland to take on the work of a church planter, starting a brand new work about 35 miles west of Belfast. And for the next 10 years had what in many ways was just the greatest adventure of faith that I've had in my Christian life and in the Christian ministry, where we started with myself, my wife, one other couple and their 3 kids. We met initially in a rented room, and 6 weeks later we were kicked out of the rented room. Ended up in a tin hut in a field with literally a mud floor, mice running around the pulpit whenever I was preaching. But just bit by bit, the Lord blessed that work, and it just grew steadily until we had a church of our own and a congregation that was established there. And that was a special time because we were the only people who came to the church were people who wanted to be there, and we kind of grew together. Me as a freshly graduated seminarian, making all the mistakes that a new minister does, but with a very understanding group of people. And together we just grew into as a church family. Was approached in 1993, 94 about the possibility of moving to Grove Chapel in London, and at first was quite resistant to the idea. We were more than happy where we were. We were seeing blessing. There was plenty of work to do, and at first I said no to them. And then they got back to me and asked what I think again about the possibility of a move, and with a lot of hesitation, but with a real sense of being persuaded by God it was the right thing to do. My wife and I responded to a call to leave Ireland behind and to move to London. It was kind of ironic because I'd been backwards and forwards to London over the years on a regular basis on church business, and would travel out to Heathrow Airport on the tube on the underground. And 2 thoughts in my mind: who in their right mind would live in a city like this? And Lord, if you're going to send me anywhere, please, not London. So it was something of the divine sense of humour that's where I ended up. London was just a completely different situation, from moving from a large village of 3,000 people in a delightfully rural setting to being on the edge of inner city London, multicultural population around us. Vast majority of people had no awareness of the Christian faith, no understanding of what the Bible really taught. And having a congregation which itself was pretty diverse, people from about 7 or 8 different nationality backgrounds, people from every social strata and walk of life. And to be able to learn to preach in a way that was free from some of the Christian jargon that had been used to back in Ulster, to be able to expound the scriptures in a way that would engage people from different backgrounds and at different levels of knowledge and experience in the Christian life. And perhaps more than that, to realize that if we as a church simply waited for the unbelieving community around us to walk in through our doors, that would never happen. And to, I think, really appreciate for the first time that when Jesus gave the Great Commission, it wasn't telling the world to come and hear, but actually telling the church to go and tell. And we spent 16 years in London just learning what it meant to take the gospel to people around us.